Why was she so precise with every motion, as if her hands remembered something her mind was still trying to bury? The armory smelled faintly of gun, oil, metal, and concrete. Rows of rifles stood in silent formation, their polished surfaces catching thin slivers of fluorescent light. To most people, it was an intimidating space, a place that carried the weight of wars fought far beyond the walls of the base. But to Ella, it was routine. She moved with quiet efficiency, shoulders relaxed, face unreadable, like someone who had long ago learned to disappear in plain sight. No one paid attention to her when she walked across the compound each morning. She wore the same contractor's polo, carried the same clipboard, and swiped the same badge at security checkpoints. To the Navy SEALs who strode past with their practiced confidence, she was invisible, just another civilian doing maintenance work, and she preferred it that way. But today, something was different. In the far corner of the precision weapons section sat a M82A1, forgotten, almost abandoned under a loose tarp. Dust clung to its edges, the protective covers sagged, and the mounting screws had been neglected longer than she could tolerate. Something about it pulled at her, not with curiosity but with recognition. She stood there a moment, staring at the weapon like it was a ghost from her past. Then carefully, she pulled it onto the cleaning mat. Her fingers hesitated over the cold metal, just for a breath. And then, without her permission, memory took over. The bolt carrier slid free in a single, practiced motion. Pins, barrel, trigger group. They came apart in sequence, her hands moving with the unconscious rhythm of someone who had once done this blindfolded, under pressure, in places where hesitation meant death. She wasn't supposed to know this anymore. 3 years of silence, 3 years of pushing it all down, of living as though that part of her had been buried with the name. Yet here she was, field stripping alike she had never left the Corps. The rifle's weight felt familiar. Its balance point settled against her palm like an old companion greeting her after years apart. And with each piece she laid out on the mat, something inside her, something she had locked away, began to stir. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her. Commander Jake stopped in the doorway. He had spent 15 years in the teams. He had seen combat in places that never made the news, had led men into the fire and brought too few of them home. He knew what skill looked like, real, unpracticed, instinctive skill. And as he watched the small, quiet contractor dismantle the most complex sniper rifle in their arsenal, his breath caught in his chest. Her movements were flawless, not the clumsy confidence of someone who had tinkered with guns for a hobby, but the sharp precision of someone whose life had depended on getting it right. His eyes narrowed. Nothing in her file, he remembered glancing over it when she was cleared, said anything about military service. Nothing suggested this level of expertise. So who was she? Ella reassembled the weapon with the same calm assurance. Every spring clicked into place, every screw turned to the exact tension. She didn't look at a manual, didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. She was home, though she would never admit it out loud. "Ma'am," said quietly. Her hands froze, the rifle halfway back together. Slowly, carefully, she turned, and there he was, Commander Jake Reaper, the kind of man no one ignored. For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, like two worlds colliding. "Sir," she replied, her voice controlled, betraying nothing. "That's some impressive weapons handling," he said, stepping closer, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Where'd you learn to field strip like that?" Ella's throat tightened. This was the question she had avoided for 3 months, the one she knew would come if anyone ever looked too closely. "I've worked around military equipment before," she said softly. "You pick things up." But even as the words left her lips, she knew he didn't believe them. Tilted his head, studying her face, her stance, the way her fingers still rested on the rifle as if it belonged there. "No, that wasn't something you picked up. That was professional-level maintenance, the kind I've only ever seen from trained snipers." Ella forced herself to meet his gaze, brown eyes against steel gray. "I'm thorough in my work, sir, that's all." He didn't flinch. didn't blink, just let the silence stretch until she could feel the walls closing in. Finally, he said, "Mind if I ask about your background?" Her jaw tightened. Standard civilian contractor, background check on file. Nodded slowly, but his face said otherwise. He was putting pieces together, weighing the risk, deciding whether the woman in front of him was a threat, a mystery, or something in between. Ella's heart beat harder than it had in years. She had built this life carefully, quietly. A name change, a fresh start, no uniforms, no rifles, no whispers of her past. She couldn't let it unravel here, not in this armory, not in front of him. But she could see it in his eyes. He already knew. And the truth was rising inside her like a tide. She could no longer hold back. "Ma'am," he said at last, his voice firm, "do you have military experience?" The words hung in the air, heavy, demanding. Ella closed her eyes for a breath, the weight of old battles pressing against her chest. She could lie, cling to her cover, and watch him walk away unconvinced. Or she could speak the truth, the one she had buried under years of silence and shame. Her lips parted. "Yes, sir," she said finally, "I do." The sound of it startled her, like hearing's voice again, echoing from another lifetime. Didn't move, he just waited. "What branch?" Her chest rose and fell, slow, reluctant. "Marine Corps." "MOS." The question struck deeper than the rest. Her throat worked as she forced the words out. "317, sir." "Scout sniper." The revelation hit the room like a crack of thunder. His expression changed, suspicion hardening into something closer to awe. He knew the code. Everyone who mattered did. It wasn't just a number. It was a reputation earned by few, carried by fewer still. And now, the quiet woman who had been cleaning rifles in the background of his base stood in front of him, a ghost from the sharpest edge of war. Ella said nothing more. The silence was her shield, her last line of defense. But's eyes never left hers, and in that silence he saw the truth. This woman wasn't hiding because she was dangerous. She was hiding because she had once been someone too dangerous to ever forget. And the weight of that truth was only beginning to surface. What was he going to find when he typed her name into that database? The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Ella stood rooted in place, her palms damp against the rifle she had just reassembled. She could feel the tremor in her fingers now, the one that always betrayed her when the past clawed too close to the surface. His eyes narrowed, reading her hesitation like a book. He was a man trained to sense weakness, to find cracks in stories. And hers, her carefully built facade of ordinariness, was crumbling. "Scout sniper," he repeated softly. "317, that's not something you just walk away from." Her jaw tightened. "I did, sir." For the first time, she saw something shift in his face. Not suspicion, not yet respect, but curiosity tinged with disbelief. He looked at her as if he were trying to remember where he had heard the name before. "What was your military name?" She hesitated. Saying it aloud felt like stepping back into a skin she had shed years ago. A skin that still itched, still burned, still haunted her when she closed her eyes. "Staff Sergeant." Froze. She could see the recognition start to dawn. He crossed the room in quick strides, his boots echoing against the concrete floor, and sat down at the terminal in the corner. His hands flew across the keys, typing with the urgency of a man who knew he was about to confirm something impossible. Ella's chest constricted. She wanted to stop him, to shut the screen off before it could spit her past back at her in sharp black letters. But she didn't move. Because maybe, deep down, some part of her was tired of hiding. Minutes passed like hours, and then stopped typing. His body went still. "Holy shit," he whispered. Ella closed her eyes. There it was. He turned slowly, his expression transformed. No longer suspicion, no longer curiosity, something closer to awe and a trace of sorrow. "Staff Sergeant, Marine Corps, Scout Sniper, 2 tour in Afghanistan, Navy Cross recipient. He paused, scanning the screen again. Confirmed kill record at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters, and his voice faltered, then steadied. The unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill shot by a female Marine, 3,250 meters, over 2 miles. The words felt like bullets themselves, each one striking a nerve she thought she had buried. Ella's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Yes, sir." Leaned back in his chair, studying her as though seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Her throat tightened. "Because I'm not her anymore." The computer screen hummed softly behind him, casting a faint glow across the armory. Folded his arms, his eyes never leaving hers. "You walked away with a record most men would kill for. You carried a name that carried weight in every circle that matters. And now you're cleaning rifles under an assumed name." "My name is Ella," she said firmly. "I changed it legally. She died overseas. The Corps gave me a discharge and I gave them my silence. It was a fair trade." Studied her, the silence heavy with unasked questions. "The file also says you left under medical discharge, combat-related PTSD." Her eyes flickered, the pain sharp and immediate. "Yes, sir." "And now?" "Now I do honest work. I clean weapons, I stay invisible, and I don't hurt anyone." The words tasted bitter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, then leaned forward, his voice quieter, more deliberate. "Ella, whichever name you want me to use, you need to understand something. Men under my command, they don't survive if they don't learn from the best, and right now, I don't have the best." She frowned, wary. "What do you mean?" "We've got 12 SEAL candidates scheduled for precision shooting training next week. The regular instructors are deployed. Without qualified guidance, they fail there. And if they fail, they don't become SEALs." She shook her head immediately. "No, I left that behind, I can't." "Hear me out." He stepped closer, his voice firm but steady. "I'm not asking you to deploy. I'm not asking you to go back into combat. I'm asking you to teach. 1 week, that's it. No missions, no bullets flying, just teaching." Her chest tightened. Just teaching. But even that phrase carried weight. It meant stepping back into a world she had clawed her way out of. It meant holding a rifle with intent again, even if only to demonstrate. I don't know if I can." Studied her carefully. "What are you afraid of?" The question hit harder than she expected. She tried to speak, but her throat closed. She wasn't afraid of failing. She wasn't afraid of the candidates judging her. She was afraid of what it would feel like to look through a scope again, to see a target, to remember that every squeeze of the trigger carried a life with it. When she finally managed to answer, her voice cracked. "I'm afraid I'll become her again. The one who pulled that trigger at 3,250 meters. The one who stopped being a person and became just a weapon. I don't want to be her anymore." For a moment said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, his voice dropping into something softer. "You're not her anymore. That's why I need you. Because you know the weight. Because you understand what it costs. And because you can teach these kids that it isn't about glory, it's about survival. About bringing your team home." Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall. He studied her one last time, then straightened. 1 week. If it doesn't work, you walk away. No questions asked. But if it does, maybe you stop running from yourself." Ella looked down at the lying silent on the mat. Its weight pulled at her like gravity. A familiar friend she wished she could forget. Her fingers brushed the cold steel and her hands shook, not from weakness but from memory. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "What if I've lost it? What if the skills are gone?" Stepped closer, his tone calm, certain. "Then we find out together, but I don't think you've lost anything. I think you've just been pretending." The words lingered in the air, heavy, tempting, dangerous. Ella closed her eyes. She could still hear echoes of Afghanistan, the sharp crack of a rifle, the whispered coordinates from a spotter, the silence after a life ended hundreds of meters away. Those memories lived under her skin, carved into her bones. And now, standing in this quiet armory, a man was asking her to pick them up again. Not to kill, not to fight, but to teach. Her hand tightened on the rifle, and she realized the hardest part wasn't saying no. It was that some small, broken part of her wanted to say yes. Why was she still awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling like the dark itself was interrogating her? Ella lay in the narrow bed of her small rented apartment, sheets tangled around her legs. Every time she closed her eyes, the desert came back, the weight of dust in her throat, the metallic sting of adrenaline in her veins, the oppressive silence after the shot that changed everything. 3,250 meters. She had measured it with calm precision, adjusted for wind, humidity, even the invisible twist of the earth itself. One breath in, one breath out, her finger tightening until the trigger broke like glass. And then silence. Not the triumphant silence of a job well done, but the hollow echo of knowing that her decision had reached across miles and erased a life she had never touched. A man who never saw her face, a man whose name she never learned. The record had followed her like a shadow. In the core, it had made her legendary. In her own mind, it had made her broken. Now wanted her to stand in front of a firing line again, not as a killer, but as a teacher. But teaching meant touching that world again, stepping back into it, opening doors she had spent 3 years slamming shut. She rolled over, pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, and whispered into the darkness, "I can't do this." But the truth was cruel. Some part of her wanted to. By dawn, she had made her decision, not because she was ready, but because avoiding it felt like running forever. And she was tired of running. When she arrived at Range 7 the next morning, the air was cool, damp with the ocean breeze. The long stretch of targets gleamed faintly in the early light, each white silhouette waiting silently at distances from 100 to 1,500 meters. She unpacked methodically, spotting scopes aligned, weather meters calibrated, wind flags placed, ammunition sorted with the precision of someone who had lived by details. Her hands worked with muscle memory, but her chest carried the weight of doubt. At exactly 600, a small convoy of candidates marched onto the range. 12 in total. 11 men, 1 woman. Their boots crunched gravel, their uniforms sharp, their faces marked with the same focused intensity she remembered from her own training days. Commander followed behind, his eyes meeting hers briefly. He gave the smallest nod. No words, no reminders, just a silent acknowledgement this was her ground now. Ella straightened. Her civilian contractor's polo suddenly felt out of place against their uniforms, but her voice, when it came, carried authority she thought she had lost. "Good morning," she said, projecting across the firing line. "I'm Ella. I'll be conducting your precision shooting instruction for the next week." The candidates shifted slightly, exchanging glances. She could read the doubt in their eyes. Civilian, female, too young maybe, the kind of quiet dismissal she had faced her whole career. Before they could form the questions, she cut them off. "This isn't about me, it's about you. Precision shooting isn't about being tough or proving your marksmanship. It's about understanding ballistics, environment, equipment, and yourself. At extended range, you don't get second chances. You get one shot, and whether that shot saves your team or costs them, everything depends on how well you prepare." She let the silence hang. She wanted them leaning in. One of the men raised his hand. "Ma'am, with respect, what's your background?" Ella had expected it. Her heart thudded once hard before she answered. "Marine Corps, Scout Sniper, MOS 317, 2 combat deployments, multiple confirmed engagements beyond 2,000 meters." The range went still. Doubt flickered into silence, silence into respect. Another voice spoke, female this time. "Ma'am, longest confirmed shot." Ella turned her gaze toward the woman who had asked. Compact frame, sharp eyes, a quiet intensity that reminded her of someone she used to know herself years ago. 3,250 meters, Ella said softly. Afghanistan, 2012. For a moment, not a sound. Even, standing at the back, seemed to straighten with a trace of pride. Now they were listening. Any other questions about my qualifications? Ella asked. No one spoke. Good, let's begin. The first day was fundamentals. Rifle setup, scope adjustment, ballistic basics, reading wind. She moved between them quietly, correcting positions, demonstrating calculations, drilling into them that this was science before it was art. Precision wasn't swagger. Precision was humility before physics. But as she walked the line, her eyes kept drifting back to the lone woman among them. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Marine transfer, had said, trying to break ground where almost no woman had before, earning a place among the SEALs. Santos was sharp, her fundamentals clean, her posture solid, but Ella could see it, the strain in her jaw, the way her eyes flicked toward the men around her every time she pulled the trigger. She wasn't just fighting the targets, she was fighting the room. When the day ended and the others packed up, Ella called out, Santos, stay behind. The young Marine froze, then walked over, standing at attention as though bracing for reprimand. Tell me about your background, Ella said. Scout Sniper School graduate, ma'am. 2 deployments as a designated marksman. Longest confirmed engagement 1,200 meters. Good shooting, Ella studied her face. Why the transfer? Santos hesitated, then spoke quietly. Because I want to be in a unit where my skills matter more than what I am. Ella's chest tightened. The words felt like an echo from her own past. She nodded slowly. You'll find that challenge everywhere, Santos. Here's my advice. Don't prove you belong by being better than everyone else. Prove it by being the best version of yourself. There's a difference. The young Marine's eyes softened just slightly. Yes, ma'am. Ella placed a hand lightly on the edge of the rifle Santos carried. Excellence speaks for itself. Don't waste energy trying to shout it. Tomorrow we'll move to 800 meters. Focus on consistency, not perfection. Yes, ma'am. As Santos walked away, Ella stood for a long time, the desert wind tugging at her hair. She had spent years hiding from her past, convinced it was nothing but a burden. But now, standing on this range, she saw something she hadn't expected. A chance. Not just to pass on skill, but to lift someone else over the same walls that had caged her. Her hands still trembled when she packed up, but her voice had been steady. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Why was Santos missing shots she could easily make? The morning sun was sharp over Range 7, the targets glittering faintly at distances that tested even seasoned marksmen. Wind flags rippled gently, the breeze deceptive in its softness. At 800 meters, small gusts became cruel. Ella watched from behind the spotting scope as Maria Santos fired 3 times. Each shot cracked against the air with confidence, but the targets remained untouched. Left, right, wide. Shots that should have been hers. Cease fire, Ella called, her tone controlled but firm. Santos's jaw clenched. Ma'am, I can make these shots. I know you can, Ella said, walking toward her. That's not the problem. The younger woman frowned, frustration flickering in her eyes. Sweat ran down the back of her neck, but Ella saw it wasn't the heat that troubled her. It was the weight of watching eyes, 11 other candidates judging her every miss. Ella crouched beside her, lowering her voice. What's happening in your head right now? Santos blinked. I'm calculating correctly. Windage, elevation, all of it, but the rounds. That's not what I asked. Ella's voice softened, but it carried an edge. What's happening in your head? The silence stretched. Then Santos spoke, barely above a whisper. I'm thinking about them, ma'am, the others. I don't want them to see me fail. Ella nodded slowly. And how's that working out? Santos's eyes dropped. It's making you rush, Ella continued. You're not following through, you're not breathing through the shot. You're firing to silence them, not to hit the target. The words echoed in Ella's own chest as she spoke them. How many times had she done the same? How many times had she let the pressure of being the only one warp her aim? Her mind flashed back without mercy province Afghanistan, a valley heavy with silence, her spotter whispering coordinates, a high-value target moving between shadows, her own pulse pounding so hard she thought it would betray her position. She remembered the weight of expectations pressing into her shoulder along with the rifle stock, the whisper in her head, "Don't miss. You're the only one who can make this shot." And then she had pulled the trigger. The world had gone still. The target collapsed in the distance. And instead of relief, she had felt the crushing knowledge that the record everyone celebrated had cost her a piece of her soul. Ella blinked hard, pulling herself back to the present. Santos was staring at her, waiting. "Do you know why I hold that record?" Ella asked quietly. Santos nodded. "Because you're an exceptional shooter, ma'am." "No," Ella said firmly, "because I wasn't thinking about proving anything. I wasn't thinking about being a female Marine. I wasn't thinking about outshooting anyone. I was thinking about the shot in front of me. That was all." Santos listened, her jaw tightening. "Excellence," Ella continued, "is forgetting everything but the target. The moment you start shooting to prove you belong, you've already lost the shot. You stop aiming for the target and you start aiming for approval, and that will always betray you." The words hung between them, heavy, necessary. Santos swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Ella placed a hand lightly on the younger woman's shoulder. "Reset your position. Breathe. Make the shot you know how to make." Santos inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, then pressed her cheek against the stock again. Her movements were calmer this time, deliberate. She adjusted the scope, waited for the wind to settle and squeezed. The shot cracked across the range. Through the spotting scope, Ella saw the target shudder, a center hit at 800 meters. "Better," Ella said. Her voice carried no triumph, only steady reassurance. "Again." Santos fired again. Another hit closer to center. And again. By the fourth shot, her rhythm had steadied, her breathing matched to the beat of the wind. When Ella finally told her to cease, Santos lowered her rifle with a long exhale, relief and pride warring across her face. Ella met her eyes. "You see the difference?" "Yes, ma'am," Santos said softly. Ella nodded, but inside her chest tightened. She wasn't just teaching Santos. She was teaching herself, reminding the broken woman inside her of lessons she had forgotten. As the day continued, Ella moved down the line, correcting others, explaining wind calls, adjusting bipods. But her mind lingered on Santos. The girl carried the same burden she once had, the pressure of proving that her gender didn't disqualify her, the weight of silence when others doubted. Ella had carried it alone, and it had nearly crushed her. Now, watching Santos steady herself after each shot, Ella wondered if this was the reason had pushed her into this role. Not to polish shooting skills, but to pass on something deeper. To remind this next generation that the shot wasn't about pride, it was about responsibility. By the end of the session, the line of candidates had all made their qualifications at 800 meters. But it was Santos's quiet smile, almost hidden beneath her exhaustion, that stayed with Ella as she packed up equipment. She hadn't just hit the target, she had silenced the doubt in her own head. And Ella knew the real training had only just begun. Why was she trembling again, when the rifle wasn't even in her hands? The range stretched wide before them, targets now pushed past 1,000 meters. Wind whipped across the flat ground, unpredictable, shifting in quick bursts that made every calculation uncertain. This was the day that separated those who could aim from those who could endure. Ella paced behind the candidates, her boots crunching gravel, spotting scope pressed against her eye. Each crack of a rifle was followed by the long pause of waiting, waiting for the truth to reveal itself in steel and dust. Impact, she called when a round struck true. Miss low right when it didn't. At this distance, it wasn't about strength. It wasn't even about eyesight. It was about patience, breath, trusting numbers scribbled on data cards when instinct begged you to fire. She saw most of them settle into rhythm by midday. Their groups tightened, their confidence grew. But Santos was different. She fired fast, almost desperate. Her rounds bracketed the target but never struck center, and with each miss, her jaw clenched harder. Ella called a ceasefire. Santos, walk with me. The young Marine slung her rifle, following her off the line. The wind tugged at their sleeves, snapping against the range flags. You're rushing again, Ella said. I don't have time to second guess, ma'am, Santos replied. If this were combat, Ella cut in sharply, you'd already be dead, or worse, your team would be. Santos stopped, eyes flashing. Ella recognized the defiance. She had seen it in the mirror years ago when older Marines had tried to slow her down. I know what it's like, Ella said, her voice softening. The pressure to prove yourself. The voice in your head that says if you fail once, they'll never let you forget it. I lived with that voice every day, and I let it own me. Santos's expression faltered. Ella looked past her, toward the horizon. Do you know what happens when you fire to prove something? Santos shook her head slightly. You miss, not just the target, you miss the truth of the moment. You stop seeing the environment. You stop hearing your breath. You stop being a shooter and start being an actor performing for the ones watching. And performance doesn't keep your team alive. Precision does. The younger Marine swallowed hard, eyes dropping. Ella let the silence linger, then placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't prove, execute. There's a difference. By the afternoon, Santos slowed her pace. Her breathing steadied. Her hits began to land, one after another, until even the other candidates noticed. But when Ella packed up that evening and returned to her apartment, the stillness hit her like a wave. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, and the memories came unbidden. The desert sky, the call over the radio, her spotter's whisper, target acquired. She remembered the weight of that rifle, the wind calculations scrawled into her notebook, the voice in her head screaming that she had to make the shot or lose everything. The recoil, the silence, the man collapsing miles away. And then her spotter's hand gripping her shoulder, whispering, you did it. But she hadn't felt triumph, only a hollow echo spreading wide and endless until it consumed her. Ella woke in the night with her heart pounding, her sheets damp with sweat. She sat up, head in her hands, whispering, I can't do this. The knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Commander standing there, his face unreadable but his eyes softer than she expected. You weren't at the bar with the others, he said. I don't drink much. He nodded slowly. You're not sleeping either. Ella froze but didn't deny it. Leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. You know, people think snipers are just about the shot. They forget it's about carrying the silence afterward. That's the real weight. Some carry it alone. Most of us break under it. Ella's throat tightened. She wanted to push him away, to shut the door and retreat into her shadows. But part of her wanted someone to understand. I walked away because that silence became unbearable, she whispered. Every life I took followed me home. They didn't leave when I put the rifle down. Nodded, and yet here you are, on the range again. Her eyes burned. I don't know if I can keep doing this. He looked at her steadily. You're not out there anymore, Ella. You're not pulling the trigger. You're teaching. And maybe that's how you carry it, by passing on the weight in a way that keeps others alive. She turned away, her hand tightening on the door. She didn't answer, but when she closed it, she felt something in his words settle deep inside her. The next morning, Range 7 was alive again. Moving targets this time, timed drills. Stress added layer by layer until even the best began to falter. Ella watched carefully, offering corrections, urging patience. Most of the candidates adapted. their groups loosening but still consistent. But Santos faltered. She rushed her shots, pushed too hard, tried to beat the clock instead of letting the shot unfold. Her final round went wide, the target untouched. "Time," Ella called. Santos lowered her rifle, chest heaving, frustration carved across her face. The others whispered quietly, their glances sharp, questioning. Ella felt it, felt the isolation closing in around Santos the way it once had around her. She saw herself in that moment. The younger version who had carried the burden of being the first, the different, the one no one believed belonged. And she knew the next thing she said could make or break Santos. She stepped forward, her voice calm. "Do you know what just happened?" Santos's voice cracked. "I failed, ma'am." "No," Ella said firmly. "You forgot. You forgot that the rifle doesn't care about the clock. It doesn't care who's watching. It doesn't care what you think you need to prove. The rifle only answers one question. Did you respect the shot?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Ella looked around at the other candidates. "And let me be clear, respecting the shot isn't weakness, it's survival. Anyone can fire fast. Few can fire true. The ones who live are the ones who know the difference." She let the words sink in, watching Santos's eyes shift, soften, begin to understand. But as Ella turned back toward the line, a whisper of doubt crept into her chest. She was teaching them to respect the shot, but had she ever truly respected her own? Why did the air feel heavier today, as though the range itself knew what was at stake? The final trials had begun. Range 7 stretched long and silent, its distant targets shimmering under the late morning heat. At 1,200 meters, the white silhouettes looked no larger than a fingertip. The candidates lay prone in their positions, rifles braced, scopes glinting in the sun. Commander stood at the back, arms folded, watching not just the shooters but Ella herself. His presence was steady, but she felt the weight of his expectation. He hadn't asked her to prove anything, not directly, but today would prove everything nonetheless. "Remember your fundamentals," Ella called across the line, her voice sharp but even. "Breathe, trust your data, respect the shot." One by one, the candidates took their turns. Each had 3 rounds to land a qualifying hit at 1,200 meters. Some performed with calm efficiency. Others faltered, their groups scattering wide, frustration gnawing at their discipline. Ella corrected quietly, offering short, clipped advice. She didn't coddle. Precision shooting had no room for ego, and they all knew it. But then it was Santos's turn. The young Marine settled into position, shoulders tense, jaw set. The wind picked up across the field, flags snapping in uneven bursts. Ella's gut twisted. This was the worst kind of scenario, variable wind at long range. Even seasoned shooters struggled. "Take your time," Ella said softly. Santos nodded, but Ella saw it. The flicker in her eyes, the weight of being the only woman in the line, the need to prove herself in front of the others. The first shot cracked. Dust kicked up far right of the target, a clean miss. "Wind's pushing harder," Ella called. "Recalculate." Santos adjusted, jaw tightening, fired again. Wide left this time. The whispers began down the line. Ella's chest tightened. She knew this spiral: miss once, pressure doubles; miss twice, confidence collapses. Santos's breathing quickened. She was firing for the room now, not the target. Ella crouched beside her, voice low but urgent. "Listen to me. You're chasing their approval. Stop. It's not about them. It's not about you. It's about the shot." Santos's hand trembled on the bolt. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I don't think I can." The words pierced Ella's chest, because she had said the same once, to herself in silence, halfway around the world. "Respect the shot," Ella whispered back. Santos squeezed off her last round. The round clipped low, striking dirt inches beneath the target. Another miss. "Cease fire," Ella called, standing tall. Her voice carried authority, but inside her heart ached. She saw the way Santos avoided the eyes of the others, the slump in her shoulders. She had given everything and fallen short. The silence was broken by his voice from the back. "Instructor." Ella turned, her chest tightening. "You've trained them, now show them." For a moment she thought she had misheard. Her pulse spiked. "Sir, that wasn't part of the—" "It is now," said firmly. "They need to see what respect for the shot looks like." The candidates turned, every eye on her. Even Santos looked up, her face pale, searching Ella's expression for an answer. Ella's hands trembled. She hadn't fired in 3 years, not once, not even at a range. She had sworn off the scope, sworn off the trigger, and now, in front of 12 candidates, and she was being asked to become her old self again. Her throat closed. The memory of the record shot thundered in her ears, the silence after, the unbearable silence. She looked at the rifle on the mat. The M82A1. The same weapon that had betrayed her peace years ago, and the same one had caught her reassembling just days earlier. Her fingers brushed the grip, cold and familiar. "You don't have to," said quietly, almost gently now. "But if you do, they'll understand everything you've been trying to teach." Ella lowered herself to the mat. The rifle settled against her shoulder, heavy but familiar. She aligned the scope, the target stretching impossibly small in the shimmering heat. Her breathing faltered, her hands shook. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly, forcing the memories back into their box. When she opened them again, the scope framed the world in a perfect circle. One target, one shot. The candidates held their breath. Santos watched with wide eyes, every ounce of doubt in her own chest mirrored in Ella's trembling hands. Ella's finger hovered over the trigger. And in that frozen moment, she was no longer sure whether she was teaching them or herself. The world narrowed, the air stilled. And she pulled in her breath, ready to let it go. Why did the world suddenly feel so quiet, as if it was holding its breath with her? Ella lay prone behind her cheek pressed against the stock, the cool steel anchoring her to the present. Yet her mind betrayed her, pulling her backward, stitching the past into the now. Afghanistan, the valley at dawn. Her spotter whispering wind calls, the weight of the rifle against her chest, the voice in her head screaming, "Don't miss. Not this one, not now." 3,250 meters. The trigger broke, the silence that followed. Her throat tightened, sweat stung her eyes. But she wasn't in Afghanistan now. She was on range 7 with 12 candidates behind her, their futures balanced on what she was about to show them. Santos watching with wide eyes, desperate for proof that failure wasn't final. Watching too, his expression unreadable but his presence steady. Ella inhaled, slow, deliberate. She let the chaos inside her settle into numbers, windage corrections, scope adjustments, breathing rhythm. She remembered what she had once taught herself: respect the shot, not the noise around it. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, sharp but familiar. She blinked through the scope, searching the distance. A puff of dust erupted on the steel target's center. Direct hit. The silence behind her broke. Not loud, not wild, but sharp intakes of breath, murmurs of disbelief. Santos's eyes lit with something fierce and unspoken. The kind of fire Ella remembered seeing in herself when someone finally showed her what was possible. Ella rolled off the rifle slowly, her hands steady now, though her chest still hammered. She sat back on her heels, meeting the candidate's stares. "That," she said quietly, "is respect for the shot. No boasting, no triumph, just truth." The lesson landed heavier than any lecture could. After the trials ended, after rifles were cleared and candidates dispersed, Ella called Santos aside again. The young Marine stood rigid, shoulders tense, as if bracing for judgment. "You think you failed today," Ella said. "I did fail, ma'am," Santos replied. Ella shook her head. "No, you stumbled. There's a difference. Failure is when you stop learning. Stumbling is when the ground reminds you you're human. Santos's eyes flickered, uncertain. "Do you think I made that shot today because I'm perfect?" Ella asked. Santos hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." "No," Ella's voice softened. "I made it because I've learned to live with my imperfections. The hands that shook when I pulled the trigger, they're the same hands that carried the record. The difference is, I don't let the shaking own me." Santos swallowed, her throat working. "Excellence isn't about silence in your head," Ella continued. "It's about carrying the noise and still making the shot. That's what you need to understand." For the first time, Santos's shoulders lowered, a trace of relief in her face. She nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." As the sun dipped low over the range, casting long shadows across the gravel, approached. His boots crunched softly, his eyes on Ella. "You broke your silence," he said simply. Ella looked away, the weight of the rifle still lingering in her chest. "I didn't want to." "But you did." His tone carried no command, only acknowledgement, and they'll never forget what they saw today. Ella exhaled, long and heavy. "I don't know if I can do this again." Studied her, then asked, "Do you know why I asked you here, really?" She frowned. "Because you needed an instructor." "Because they needed more than an instructor," he said. "They needed someone who carries the weight, someone who won't lie to them about what it costs." His gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. "Ella, I don't want this to be just 1 week. I want you here, permanently." The words landed like a shot of their own. Ella froze, her breath catching. Stay, teach. Make this her life again, not hiding, not running, not just cleaning weapons in the shadows. Her heart pounded, torn between relief and fear. And for the first time since she left the Corps, Ella realized she was standing at a crossroads. One path led back into hiding, the other into something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Why did the silence feel different now? No longer a burden, but a choice. The candidates lined up for their final qualifications, rifles braced, nerves stretched tight. Stood at the back again, arms folded, the weight of judgment balanced in his gaze. Ella paced quietly along the line, her hands steady now, her voice calm but firm. "Trust your training," she told them. "Not me, not your doubt, just the shot." They listened, every one of them, because after yesterday there was no longer doubt in their minds that she belonged here. One by one they fired. Rounds cracked, steel rang, dust puffed. Not every shot landed, but enough did. They had learned. They had grown. When Santos's turn came, Ella watched closely. The young Marine's posture was than the others, but her breathing was steady. Her first shot struck wide. A murmur rippled down the line. Ella didn't move, didn't correct. She just said softly, "Respect the shot." Santos recalibrated, fired again, center hit. The final round followed, another hit, clean and true. Santos lowered her rifle, her chest rising in a deep exhale. For the first time since the week began, Ella saw no desperation in her eyes, only calm. "That's it," Ella said, her voice quiet but filled with something deeper than pride. "That's the shot." When the last candidate cleared the line, addressed them all. "You've passed because you were trained by someone who knows not just how to shoot, but how to survive. Remember that. Carry it forward." The candidates dispersed, their faces marked with a respect they hadn't shown her at the start. Santos lingered, her eyes meeting Ella. No words. Just a nod, one soldier to another, one woman carving her place where few had before. That night Ella sat alone in the armory. The M82A1 lay across the table, gleaming under the overhead lights. She touched it gently, her fingers tracing the cold steel. It no longer felt like a ghost. She thought about its offer, a permanent role, a chance to shape the future instead of hiding from the past. Her chest tightened, the old weight pressing against her ribs. Teaching wouldn't erase the silence of her record shot. It wouldn't bring back the lives she had taken. But maybe, just maybe, it could mean those memories weren't the end of her story. 6 months later, the armory was different. Her desk carried stacks of training manuals, data sheets, ballistic charts. The nameplate on the door read, Senior Precision Shooting Instructor, Naval Special Warfare. Ella moved through Range 7 with quiet authority now, guiding new candidates, correcting grips, teaching patience. Her voice carried steadiness, her posture calm, her presence unmistakable. Santos had graduated, earning her trident and a place on SEAL Team 3. She still called sometimes, late nights from deployments, asking about wind calls or optics, but mostly just to hear her mentor's voice. Ella always answered, always. And when Santos made her first long shot in the field, not a record, not history, just the right shot at the right time, she sent Ella a single message: respect the shot. Ella smiled at that, because that was the legacy she wanted to leave behind, not records, not headlines, not silence, but respect. She stood in the armory that evening looking at the again. Once it had been the weight that broke her. Now it was simply a tool, a piece of steel, nothing more, nothing less. Identity wasn't about running from the past, she realized. It wasn't about burying names or erasing records. Sometimes it was about carrying what you'd learned into something larger than yourself. And sometimes the most important targets weren't the ones you hit with bullets. They were the ones you reached with knowledge, patience, and the courage to keep teaching when silence would have been easier. Ella once finally understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.